The wheels on these on this particular Mariana was was far from original.
Over here we have the cat file of the brake caliper plate assembly.
But what we found here is that the hub is actually not original. Well, we are in trouble because there's no way, or it is very, very hard to get original parts for these racing bikes.
All the parts are modeled. After approval of the customer, we're gonna make step files of it, which go to the producers of the specific parts.
So, welcome to another video here at Back to Classics. And today's subject is this 1955 Ducati 100 Gran Sport, or the Mariana as it became to know later. A lot to talk about on this particular subject. So we're actually going to split it up in several videos. One about the bike itself and how we're about to restore it to its former glory. And we will come back with a separate video on the history of the Gran Sport and the race successes it had in the 1950s. A lot to tell there, because it was a hugely successful bike for Ducati, and in fact the genesis of the whole Ducati being known as a maker of sporting motorcycles. In fact, also the first bike designed by Fabio Taglioni for Ducati, the famous engineer that came to work for Ducati until his retirement in the early 90s. So, in fact, this is in many ways the basis of all the bevel drive Ducatis and Ducatis after that we are working on and featuring in this video. So, let's dive in a little bit deeper into this project. So, diving in a little bit about the history of the Mariana races of the 1950s. What can be said? A huge amount, because it was a great era of racing, and a very special era of racing that we can go into a separate video. But going back in time, you have to imagine the early 1950s in Italy, and there were huge events called the Gran Fondo races. Many names are still known today, more of a touring outing, like the Mille Miglia and the MotoGiro d'Italia and the Milano-Taranto. All these long distance races over several days across Italy. Well, in fact, there used to be races in the 1950s. Later they were banned, and now they still exist, but more of a touring rally, so to speak. But back in the 1950s, we can show you some images of those races. They were hugely popular. There were hundreds, even millions of spectators along the roads in Italy when these events came past. And it was a way for manufacturers to really put themselves on the forefront by competing in these races, and winning of course would even be better. And going to Ducati, being not at all known as a motorcycle manufacturer in the early 1950s, they had to come up with a plan to actually get into racing in order to make a name for themselves and sell as many bikes as they could. And that particular bike became the Gran Sport, first introduced in 1955 as the one we see here. And actually the first bike Fabio Taglioni designed for Ducati after he was hired there in the same year. So it was actually a very, very rushed job to get this bike designed and actually working. Again, which we will come back in a later video. But this was the Ducati entering 1955 a number of 100cc Gran Sport models to compete in the MotoGiro d'Italia and in the Milano-Taranto. And they were hugely successful. They dominated their class, the 100cc class, and that actually was repeated in 1956 and in 1957, entering also in the 125cc class with the 125cc version of the Gran Sport. And then in 1957, disaster struck at the Mille Miglia when a Ferrari race car was crashed and hit people that were spectators that were watching the race, and killing a few people as well as some children as well. And that was the end of Gran Fondo races because the Italian government just outright banned it that same moment, which was, well, unfortunate for these events, these long distance races, like the ones that Ducati was entering the Gran Sport in. So that also meant that the bikes that were specifically made for these Gran Fondo races were no longer suitable for other purposes, meaning they were entering into short track races that we see today. So a lot of original Gran Sports of that era were converted into a short track racing bike. Well, this particular bike was built in 1955 to compete in the several races like the MotoGiro as a 100cc. But we think that over the years, especially after '57, of course, when the Gran Fondo races were banned, the bike was converted for short track race use, which meant an enlargement of the capacity to 125cc. That's only the bore, in fact, that is changed, but that makes it competitive in the 125cc class of short track racing, because there was no 100cc class. And of course, a lot of original parts that were specifically made for competing in the long distance races over the course of several days were deleted and replaced by parts that were more suitable for short track races. So there are very few, if not any, original Gran Sport left in the world, especially if you look at the original specifications. They were made in 1955, 56 and 57. So the same goes for this one. There has been, well, a lot of parts have been replaced and changed over the years, which makes sense because it is a racing bike, and people that acquire these racing bikes do that with the purpose of racing it. So a lot of changes are made to keep it running. Now, at some point, someone decided to restore it to what looked to be original specifications, like the fuel tank, the seat, etc. But that was not done in a very good way, as we can show you later on. So we're now actually given the task to restore this bike to its former glory. In fact, to the way it was presented at the start of the MotoGiro in 1955. And to do that, we have to do a lot of work to get this bike on that level, which we will show you now. Now, before we start with this restoration and take it apart completely, we need to make sure what parts are there and what parts are missing. And especially for these specifically made racing bikes, if parts are missing, that means that we are in trouble, because there's no way, or it is very, very hard to get parts, original parts for these racing bikes. So one thing that we immediately saw when we started this project, and we can add a picture of the bike as it came to our workshop, was that the wheels were not original, not in any way as they should be. On the other hand, the only thing that we do have are black and white images of how the bike was raced in the 1950s, and some reference of bikes that are still out there in the world that have correct wheels fitted. And we know, of course, some of the literature that has been written over the years about how these wheels should be. But looking at this, what we found, well, it is parts are original, parts are not. We know it should be a Amadori made braking hub with all these parts in there, but we had some huge difficulties to get this back to original specifications, which we'll show you later. So we actually knew right from the start there was only one way that we're going to restore this bike to its original shape and way it was in 1955, and it was to go dive really deep into the design of the bike, to develop parts of ourselves, new parts to be added to this project. And for that we need a 3D drawer, a 3D developer, and that is Will that we have here.
Hi.
Hi, Will. Will is specifically keen in developing 3D parts, and that is what he does here at Back to Classics as well, developing these parts, as we can show you now. So, Will, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your name? Where are you from?
My name is Will Peters, and I'm from Valkenswaard in the south of Holland. Yeah, well, I'm a freelance product developer, and I support my customers with modeling parts in 3D CAD to be able to reproduce those parts.
So, Will, what is 3D design all about? How do you go about designing products?
Well, 3D design is basically used for producing some parts and equipment. Well, when having sketches, it's quite clean. You can use those, but if we don't have them, then I would be glad to have some old parts or pictures and combinations of that, so that I can try to imagine how the piece originally should look like.
Yeah.
And when I have that, we can discuss it and see if it's correct like that, or if we do need to make some modifications. And also, it's about the shape, but it's also what kind of material do we want to use. Some of the parts are made of magnesium, which is very hard and expensive to reproduce. So maybe we choose 3D printing or other principles.
And that is hard in this case because we had very little to go on, in fact, in this particular model, which we can show you a little later. But we have to relate it to original parts. But the big question is how original these then are still. And the only thing that we have is pictures. Where no sizes and dimensions are on there, of course.
So there you have to use your imagination and try to figure out how it should look like.
And how it was produced back in 1955.
Also.
So let's have a look at how that actually works.
Okay, let's have a look at the front wheel of the Mariana racer. Well, this is a picture of quite original brake caliper plate. Over here we have the part which was on the actual Mariana we're looking at now. So if we compare this, then you see that it's not in a way compatible. These parts are made on it later on. The brake caliper plate in basic is quite okay, but over here they also removed some parts and materials. So now we have to make a new one which is correct. Over here we got the new one, and if we switch around between the picture and the CAD file, we will see that it's original in shape. This part is built using Solidworks, which is a 3D CAD program. And after approval of the customer, then we want to print this in 3D and make some milling and modification so that it looks original. The caliper plate, as we saw, was not original. We think, or we basically know, that this wheel hub is the original part. With that, we won't have to model this one, because this one will be taken apart, cleaned, and refurbished in a way. So then we have this part, and with the new caliper plate we have a new brake assembly. With only the brake caliper plate we aren't there yet. Over here there will be a cam in. It's not in place at the moment, but we need to make those also from scratch. Over here we have the CAD file of the brake caliper plate assembly. All the parts are modeled, and after approval of the customer, we're gonna make step files of it, which go to the producers of the specific parts, who will make sure we get the correct size, dimensions and materials. Okay, over here we have the assembly of the brake caliper plate with an animated exploded view. I can show you all the parts which are in. Some of the parts we have to produce, but some of the other parts we can refurbish. So, but basically this shows how the brake caliper plate has been assembled and yeah, what it looks like.
Okay, so what we have just seen is that the wheels on these on this particular Mariana was well, it was far from original, and what we now end up with is a complete set of drawings to actually make these wheels as they should. Starting with the front wheel, here we have a complete parts list of all the parts that are needed, up to the tiniest nut and bolt that is a part of that front wheel. And behind that is a full set of drawings of how the wheel should be, and also taking into account, of course, what we have as parts here. So on the front wheel, as discussed before, this whole outer plate, including the brake shoes, are non-original. And well, we cannot make anything out of this again, so we have to put that aside and make a complete new set of parts to get the outer plate and the inner brake drums, the brake shoes, completely newly made. But we will use, in this instance, this original brake hub, originally made by Amadori in the 1950s. This is actually in quite a good condition. It may not look very pretty, but we can address that much easier. Apart from this spoke crown that you see on this side of the hub, that has been made smaller at some point in its history, and we have drawn up a drawing of how it should be. So we're going to pull that off and make a new one in the correct size, a little larger and original in shape and size, that we're going to fit on this original hub. So that is the biggest job on the front wheel, is actually to create this. These are all parts being made, of course, in 3D drawings. We will aim for getting the outer hub cover and the brake shoes themselves made in aluminium as a 3D print. We have some experience with that, actually very good experience, and I think we can, because we only need one of each item without going into very difficult castings and things like that. 3D printing will be the way forward for this. And apart from that, there will be a lot of work on smaller parts and other details, bushes, pivot pins, etc., that we're all going to make in-house on our lathe and milling machine, to complete that job. So that's up next. Moving to the rear wheel, we've done more or less the same. That's what we have here. Again, a complete parts list with all the little details up to the last nut and screw. Rear wheel, it's actually the other way around. So what we can use in this instance is the outer plate, which is original, and also the brake shoes and all the parts in there. In fact, what we did is we used this part as a template to design the one for the front wheel, because we know this is original, came from the same factory. Of course, there's little dimension differences with front and rear, but we used this as a template to create the front brake outer hub and brake shoes. So this is going to be reused after complete refurbishing. Of course, we will fit new liner on there, as well as some other minor parts that we're going to replace. But what we found here is that the hub is actually not original. It's much narrower and a much different design compared to what we have found on pictures and other data that we found of the Mariana Gran Sport in the 1950s. So again, we have drawings of the complete wheel in breakdown, the cover that we have, like I said, used for as a template to design the front one, and then we have the rear brake hub sub-assembly, and this will be all created new. Again, we will aim for a 3D print of one hub that we're going to produce in aluminium, and of course we also need the inner the brake hub in steel, which we're going to make and machine and fit that to the newly printed outer hub, as well as some other parts, again, like bushes, pivot pins, etc., etc., springs, and that will be all used to get this complete again. Third and final big issue we found with the wheels is the assembly of the rear sprocket and how that is originally designed and what we found on the bike. This is actually quite hopeless. As you can see, hopefully there has been someone in there drilling all kinds of holes where they shouldn't be, and the transmission damping rubbers that we found in the rear sprocket. This is quite important because the whole power of the engine is transferred through the rear sprocket, obviously, to the rear wheel, and you need some sort of a transmission damping system to get that to get the shocks out from the engine away from the rear wheel. So this should be rubber, but what we actually found is, well, something that has quite deteriorated over time, that is cannot be used again. So we need to come up with something new here, as well as this basic design wasn't how it should be originally, but this is all fabricated in a hopeless way. So again, we have to put this aside. We cannot use this in a full 100% restoration of this bike. So we have to start over again. Again, we came up with a set of drawings. The sprocket, here you see the transmission rubbers, spacer plate, and the two outer plates that are all going to be newly made, machined. So this is the new outer plate. The sprocket, we're going to make sprockets in different sizes, as we think would have been the case in the races of Gran Fondo races back in the 1950s, where they could easily change out larger sprockets or smaller sprockets depending on the course they were driving. And again, a lot of details in drawings, like this transmission rubber that needs to be newly made, as well as some spacers and other bits and pieces, again, that is up for production fabrication. And here we have a set of drawings of some other again minor bits, like the spindles and the pivot pins, etc. So a lot of work to do still. We now know what to do, actually, and now it's a matter of actually doing it. We cannot do everything in-house, like the 3D prints, obviously, some other CNC machining that we're going to outsource. So we're going to get these drawings to our trusted suppliers in those areas. Again, we will do a lot of work in-house, the smaller details, a lot of the production of pins, bushes, etc., which we're going to take up. And then hopefully in the end, we have all the parts on the workbench to recreate a set of wheels for this 100 Gran Sport Mariana. So now that we have drawn up all the parts for the wheels, exactly, because well, we're only just talking about the wheels at this stage of the restoration, because we were so far off what we found on the bike, and because they are so unbelievably rare that we cannot ever find these original parts anywhere. So this concludes the development of the parts of the wheels. Now we're going to actually have them made and make them ourselves into a set of new wheels. But then, of course, we have a lot of other things to do on that on the bike to actually restore it, and that will be subject for future videos. So this concludes this episode here at Back to Classics. We got a lot of work to do still, so be sure to follow us and subscribe to our channel. For this time, thank you for watching. Toodle-dokie. See you next time.